we're heavily relying on technology today, and so hopefully everything goes well. We have 2 Zoom presenters and 2 in-person presenters. It looks like we're ready to roll, but I want to welcome everybody back to the Housing Task Force 2.0, and we've got a lot of new members, to be honest with you, on the task force. So, and we'll have a couple more members coming in as they're still en route as well. So, looking forward to a good day of testimony and information gathering today. So, Madam Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Senator Carpenter. Senator Deneen.
Here.
Senator Higdon. Senator Neal. Senator Smith. Representative Kleins.
Here.
Representative Decker.
Present.
Representative Holloway.
Here.
Representative McPherson.
Here.
Representative Watkins.
Present.
Co-Chair Mills.
Here.
Co-Chair Witten.
Here.
All righty. Well, as we stated before, we've got a lot of new members, so we need to kind of set the stage. But we're hoping this interim to talk about some real world things we can do in the state of Kentucky. Be less ideological and more practical on what we can do. But we've got to gather some information today, and we've asked our professionals from the Kentucky Housing Corporation to come to us and share some of their thoughts to kind of frame the beginning of the Housing Task Force. So, Ms. Smith, if you want to introduce yourself and your guests, the floor is yours. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I don't know how much you got, 20 minutes, or how much you can squeeze in here. But we want to try to have some room to ask some questions as well. So
we hope we've got a little bit more than that, because we got a lot to try to cover.
I understand.
Senator Mills, my name is Winston Miller, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Housing Corporation. And as you know, Wendy Smith, who appeared twice before you last year, is the Deputy Executive Director for Housing Programs. And before we get started, I want to thank you for inviting us last year and giving us an opportunity to address you. I want to thank you again for inviting us this year and giving you an opportunity to address you. This is obviously, by virtue of the fact that you're here, you all know that this is a very important issue for Kentucky.
It is.
And we appreciate the fact that you all are taking it seriously and are being very, very serious about this. So thank you very, very, very much for that.
Welcome, Mr. Miller. The floor is yours.
Okay. Wendy, if you'll put up the next slide. And I think I committed the cardinal sin of not turning off my cell phone before I got started. I heard it starting to beep in my pocket.
That's fine, as long as nobody calls you.
Yeah. I don't want to be in your contempt, so perhaps it'll go off here in just a second. The purpose, first of all, our aim is to be a resource to you. As the Kentucky Housing Corporation, we do have some expertise and some experience in housing issues, and we hope to be able to share that. We won't be able to cover everything today. We'd be happy to come back on another day and dig more in depth into any of the areas that we cover today, or any of the areas that that you would like us to cover. But today we hope to give you an update on the housing landscape in Kentucky since our housing shortage presentation last year. And we hope to give you a summary of the current resources for housing in Kentucky, both on the state and federal level. And then we hope finally to make some recommendations about what the task force should focus on in your deliberations this next year for plans. Having said all that, I turn the floor over to Wendy.
Thank you, Winston. And I'll just echo the appreciation I have for the reconvening of this committee and for inviting us back. So first, I'm going to just give you all some updates on kind of the housing landscape, broken into a couple different buckets. I want to reiterate, and as Senator Mills said, just kind of level set, because there are so many new members. In case you didn't hear it at one of our many, many webinars or presentations last year, KHC did a lot of kind of public speaking and public messaging around the housing supply gap last year. And I'd like to ground that first, before I get into the numbers for you all, into this idea of what we call the housing continuum, also known as the housing market. It's just the idea that for households across Kentucky, there are folks who make many different incomes, right? From very extremely low incomes to folks who have robust incomes, and they are looking for housing solutions that are aligned to those incomes. That is a term or phrase that I stole from Northern Kentucky, which has really been doing a lot of work around income-aligned housing. Why we think this is so important is it was a policy element that I will admit to you a couple years ago, we weren't paying attention to as Kentucky Housing Corporation, and we are fiercely paying attention to it now. We mainly focus at Kentucky Housing Corporation on households on this continuum that you're looking at that are from the green down to the pink. So folks who are looking for affordable home ownership all the way down to folks who are experiencing homelessness. We don't typically pay attention to or have any programs for the market rate end of things. But what we've realized is almost everything we do assumes there's enough supply in the marketplace for down payment assistance or a loan that lets you have slightly lower credit rating or lets you have a lower down payment or a rent voucher, that those would be enough to let you find a home or an apartment in the marketplace. And we realized a couple of years ago that was becoming untrue. We had folks who could get approved for a loan at $150,000, $170,000 to buy a home. And there used to be homes in Kentucky to buy at that amount, and there just aren't now, right? And we used to have folks who could get a rent voucher through our Section 8 program and find somewhere in a rural county to rent, and that was becoming harder and harder. So we commissioned last year this housing supply gap analysis to try to look at what are the gaps across this whole continuum, not just the folks we typically focus on. So again, we released last year, and we didn't do it ourselves. We used a company out of Columbus, Ohio called Bowen National Research that's done a lot of regional studies around Kentucky, particularly Owensboro and Bowling Green. We commissioned them to do this county by county analysis. And what we wanted to know is, what is the gap in units for renters and homeowners across the different income levels and county by county? And so the total gap for 2024, so we're calling that the current housing supply gap, is 206,000 units, roughly equally split between rental and home ownership. You'll see that. What's different is that for rentals, there's a greater need for our moderate and low income households to have rental options that are affordable. For home ownership, it is almost evenly spread across all the income bands. So there is a lot of need for income options, for income-aligned options for home ownership, and our middle and lower income renters really need some affordable rental options. When we spread this, and again, we have this on our website, you can get the raw data, you can get more than you ever wanted. We can make any of that available to y'all, including the full report if you like. When we spread this county by county, what we found is every county needs more housing. We shared this with our congressional delegation earlier this year. That's why it's color-coded for the congressional districts. But every county needs housing. And while some of the rural county numbers can appear small, when you take that number as a share of the population or as a share of the housing units in that county, these can be really high as a percentage of the people or the households in that county. So while some of the numbers look big in the urban areas, the relative percentage is pretty high in a lot of rural communities. We also wanted to make sure you all knew that as a part of rolling out that supply gap analysis, we have been almost overwhelmed by partners that aren't typically partners of ours, wanting to talk about it, to problem solve around it, hearing more data about it, wanting us to come to their conferences. I won't go over the list, but I just wanted you all to know a lot of economic development groups, the realtors, the Bankers Association, a lot of area development districts, the County Judge Executives Association. We're just being engaged by a lot more groups that we don't have a program for. We don't have something for them to come apply apply to. It's not exactly a fit, but they want to talk about how to solve some of their housing issues. So again, I just want to reiterate that the current supply gap is 206,000 units. The study that we commissioned also did a 5-year projection forward. If construction levels stay on trend, given our economic growth, given our household trends, in-migration, out-migration, that's expected to grow to 287,000 units by 2029. I would like to highlight one of the biggest reasons behind this. There are many factors that contribute to the supply gap. You all heard about those last year. The biggest one is the 2008 housing crisis and the Great Recession and the loss of construction capacity that followed. And in the past 17 years, we have never gotten back to building what we used to build before the 08 recession. So the light blue are actual housing starts in Kentucky. And what you see is it really tanks at 08 and 09. That dark blue line that is pulled forward and is constant, that's the average housing starts. If we had just built on average after 08, we would have built these houses, and we did not. So the 2008 recession and the loss of construction capacity and the GCs, the subs, and the workers that worked in those construction, jobs, we lost that. Rural communities really lost it big, but everywhere across the U.S. lost it. Okay, so now I want to move into what are some of the housing dynamics that we're seeing now. A lot of these are carried forward from previous years, but I want to make sure that our conversation and your all's thinking is grounded in these dynamics. It's grim, so buckle up, y'all. The gap across the U.S. is estimated between 1.5 million and 3.7 million. So, the good news, if it's any comfort, is we're not alone. The bad news is that whatever we do, we are competing at a national level to get more construction here, right? And it's going to be states that amp up their housing supply, that win out with jobs and population. We, across the state and across the nation, have lost units to natural disasters. Many of you are probably from communities where that is directly visible. We have heightened financial stress on homeowners and landlords. That's largely because we have higher interest rates if they do have a variable rate mortgage. Insurance rates are really escalating for landlords and for homeowners. And taxes are going up. When values go up, taxes also go up. And so these pressures are really putting a lot of stress onto existing homeowners and our landlords. We are seeing it even across our affordable housing portfolio. Insurance rates in particular really escalating for those properties. There's a lot of pressure on construction costs due to tariffs, but also workforce shortages and just cost of materials. There's also, you know what, I have that duplicated, sorry. Maybe I just wanted to emphasize it extra. And home prices and rents, they're seeing increases that are really outpacing the increases that we're seeing in income. Household incomes are going up, but they are not keeping pace with how much rents and home prices are going up. So that means folks are spending more and more of a percentage of their income on their housing. More dynamics. The high interest rates, right? That is making it hard for folks to access home ownership, but it is also making it hard for developers and home builders to take risks when they're developing, because if they're worried about, their construction interest being somewhere between 8 to 10%, that's a really high burn rate. If that rate goes up during construction, it's going to really eat their profit. So it's leading a lot of developers and builders to do high-end apartments and high-end custom homes because that's where it's safe. It's not greed. That's where you've got enough buffer financially to hedge against risk. The insurance costs I mentioned, and then the cost burden. So as the cost of housing goes up, but incomes aren't going up, we are seeing more and more homeowners and renters spending too high of a percent of their income on housing. So they don't have enough left over to keep their car up, to pay for daycare, to pay for medical care, all that kind of stuff. We are seeing homelessness increasing across the nation and in Kentucky. I'll touch more on that in a second. We're seeing diminishing federal support and the possibility of drastic federal cuts. I'll talk a little more about that. And then there is this worry about looming economic downturn. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy, but that worry has a lot of builders and lenders in a pretty risk-averse place right now. This is the housing price index. This is from the Federal Reserve of St. Louis. And it's just showing you over time, starting before 1980 through now, the housing price index in Kentucky. So what you saw is gradual growth until the '08 crisis. Then it kind of flattened. But now you have seen a really drastic increase in the housing price index across the state. Similarly, which kind of goes in tandem with that, we are beginning to see home ownership rates decline in Kentucky, not the direction that most of us want them to go. And that is really just a function of cost. It's becoming a higher and higher barrier for folks to become homeowners. In addition, U.S. housing starts are not projected to accelerate over the next couple years. The National Association of Home Builders put out actual data and then projections going through 2027 for housing starts. The blue is all housing starts, the orange is single family homes, and the green is multifamily. And what you can see is it's basically leveled off, or for single family, pretty much level. For multifamily, it's expected to decrease a little bit through 2027. Getting at the point that it's not likely to catch up on our housing supply gap. It's just expected to maybe, if we're lucky, just hold steady. Again, that just really correlates with the housing permits data that I shared a few minutes ago in Kentucky. We are not bouncing back to pre-08 levels with our construction, and not expected to. In addition, housing market dynamics are resulting in increased homelessness in Kentucky. We've seen it increase since 2022, and from 23 to 24, we saw a 10% increase. From 24 to 25, an 11% increase. How do we track this increase? On one night in January every year, homeless service and shelter providers across the state do what's called the point-in-time count, where they count everyone who's in a shelter, because that's homeless too, you don't have a permanent home, and folks who are on the streets, in cars, in tents. It is not a perfect count in terms of the number, but it is a good trend monitor. And so what we are seeing, again, is double-digit increases last year and this year. So in sum, the impact of this housing shortage really makes it, in our view, Kentucky's most critical housing issue. We usually are advocating around really specific issues, homelessness, Section 8, foster youth getting housed. We feel like we no longer have the luxury of focusing on narrow specifics and have to really focus on the supply for all Kentuckians, not just low-income Kentuckians. Because if we had enough, we wouldn't have the following problems. These are the impacts. We have higher average housing costs right now. Kentuckians are spending too much of their monthly income on housing costs. We have lower home ownership rates, too little workforce housing, increased household instability, as evidenced by evictions, and then more homeless Kentuckians. The federal budget uncertainty makes a big question mark on a lot of this. So I'm going to share with you what's been proposed. Nothing has happened yet in this area. Really what we've had at the federal budget for the last 10 years is a continuing resolution, which is where they mainly carry forward, sometimes with slight cuts, funding levels. So what you can think about, particularly for rent assistance, if you keep carrying forward last year's, but housing costs are going up, we're getting a little less out of each year's federal budget. So those have felt like a little bit of a cut, but small and incremental. But what's been proposed by the Trump administration for the FY 2026 budget, so this has not been approved, it's what is proposed and what has been recommended, is a 44% cut to all HUD programs, which would remove about $286 million in housing funds from the Kentucky housing environment. And that's everything from community development block grant dollars, the Home Investment Partnership, Section 8, it's public housing funding. It crosses over many, many, many different resources. Many of the resources in the end up with a private landlord or with a nonprofit, a private nonprofit. And so I just want this on your all's radar. Again, we don't know that this will happen. This is what's been proposed, but it would affect all of Kentucky and many, many, many parts of the state. Okay, I was also asked to share a little bit about what the existing resources are that support housing in Kentucky. Now, I could spend a couple hours on this, so I'm going to give you all a real bird's eye view. And as Winston said, if you all want us to come back to the group or individually to go deeper on any of these topics, we are happy to. Or to get you something in writing, we're happy to do that. So in terms of federal programs, and again, you all have this. There are many, many federal programs that have existed for a long time. Almost none of them are new. And they primarily support kind of moderate income folks all the way down to people experiencing homelessness. As you go up on the income range to folks who are just making middle incomes and want market rate rental or home ownership, there aren't a lot of programs at the federal level that support that kind of housing development. Private lending does support it. I did add that at the bottom. And the Community Development Block Grant Program can support infrastructure for housing development. At the state level, we only have a handful of sources that we use to create housing. The Kentucky Affordable Housing Trust Fund, I believe it was created in '92. It generated last fiscal year $3.8 million. That's simply not a whole lot of funds to do a whole lot with. It's meaningful because it's state dollars and it's really flexible, and it's generated based off of recording fees. I'll show you more about that in a sec. But that's existed for a long time. We have a lot of Habitats for Humanity and housing nonprofits that use that program. It's very meaningful, but because it's based on recording fees and there aren't a lot of properties selling right now, we simply aren't seeing much revenue in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The legislature also created a few years ago the Rural Housing Trust Fund. It was first created in response to the Western Kentucky tornadoes and the Eastern Kentucky flooding with one-time funding, and then it got another tranche of one-time funding for this fiscal year, or last fiscal year and this fiscal year. It's one-time funding though, so it's not an ongoing resource, but it's very flexible and can serve folks earning up to 120% of area median income. So that's middle income folks, really, really flexible. It's been a great tool for disaster recovery and for just housing generation across rural Kentucky. There's also mortgages that Kentucky Housing Corporation originates that we service and fund across the state just for affordable home ownership along with down payment assistance. We serve about 3,700 home buyers every year at Kentucky Housing Corporation through that program. And then, of course, Kentucky offers a mortgage interest deduction to home buyers. So that's meaningful as well. Okay, what's missing? Nearly all of the resources that I just talked to you about have been in place since decades before the 2008 housing crisis. They've been around for a long time, and they've either been level funded or have had decreases in funding. And so what's been budgeted, as well as private lending, are simply insufficient to kind of spark and catalyze the kind of housing construction we need to keep up with demand and close our housing gap. The gap seems to be growing larger every year and appears like it will for the foreseeable future if we don't do something to really incentivize and spark more production. Akin to that, I wanted to share with you the survey that the National Association of Home Builders did about housing concerns for home builders in 2025. Their biggest concern was the high interest rate environment that we are in. That affects the buyers, right, because mortgage rates are high, but it also affects those home builders because their construction loans are very high, which makes them averse to risk. Buyers expecting that interest rates or prices will go down is another worry. Everything else is pretty related to costs, right? The cost of land, the cost of labor, the cost of materials, inflation. So their big worries are all of the things that go into driving up the cost of every home they build and them not being able to sell it or rent it. I also wanted to make sure that you all know that many states are taking action. I did present on this at the last task force. You all have that presentation later in your binder. I won't spend a ton of time on it, but highlighting just a few things. In terms of what other states are doing around housing supply, it typically falls into three buckets. One is establishing some ambitious production goals, and I'll give you some examples here in just a sec. One is land use and zoning incentives or mandates. I'm not going to talk a lot about that. I think some of the following speakers will, but that's things like some states are being as bold as, no longer allowing single family zoning. Some are saying you have to allow accessory dwelling units on any single family unit. Some are, in Indiana, they're taking more of an incentive approach where if you want certain housing funding at the state level, you will get a priority if you have done some zoning or land use changes or sped up your approvals processes. The third bucket is what I would like to focus on, is funding and financing. And that's coming in the form of state tax credits, tax abatements for property development, particularly affordable development, housing infrastructure financing, and housing development financing. So in terms of those creating ambitious goals, this is just a sampling of what we've seen some states do. And really what this seems to be doing is anchoring the issue and setting a goal that rallies maybe the legislature, maybe state agencies, local governments around the desire to get more homes built. Again, a state tax credit has been very popular across the U.S. This is the current map of states that have a state tax credit for affordable housing. Kentucky had one proposed last year. We do not currently have one. I want to make sure that that's clear. But there aren't many states that don't have one, and almost all of our neighbors do. And then probably most impressively is the just barrage of states that have created funds, often revolving loan funds or partial grant, partial loan funds, to incentivize housing development across their states. And these are rural states, red states, plenty of blue states are also doing it too, but many states are committing significant amounts of funding to goose their housing supply, really recognizing that there is a need. It might not be a forever need, but there is a need to get it increased. Many of these are revolving funds, or they require a match so that they're leveraging a lot of dollars, but there's just a lot going on across states to do this because, as you all heard in the last task force, a lot of states are viewing housing as an economic development advantage. If they can be the ones that produce more housing and have more affordable housing, they can capture the jobs and the population tied to those jobs. I would like to highlight two programs in Indiana that the Chamber highlighted last year and that we've talked with them a lot about. We've actually met with the folks in Indiana, and we're going to be bringing them to our conference, which we have invited all of you to attend and be on a plenary with. But we're also going to have these Indiana folks at our conference to talk about these programs. The first is the Residential Infrastructure Fund, RIF for short. This is a $75 million fund, which is low interest, 20-year loans. That is magnificent. It's low interest and 20 years. So it's low cost and it's patient to develop infrastructure that is going to support housing. So that might be roads, sewers. You can use it to purchase land, utilities. It's the things that would let a local government almost do kind of an industrial park so that the homes could get built, right? They're not building any homes. They're just doing the infrastructure to make it easy to get them built and shortening the time period that it's going to take that home builder. Thereby shortening their risk. A companion program, they don't have to work together, but they can work together, is the READY program, which stands for Regional Economic Acceleration and Development Initiative. This is done out of the Economic Development Corporation in Indiana. And it started as a $500 million program funded with American Rescue Plan funds, but they committed another $500 million in just state dollars. So they've added to it. And it's meant to encourage all across Indiana regional planning where regions say, what are we most focused on? Do we need a trail system? Do we need housing? Do we need childcare? Do we need an arts center? Whatever it is, for them to plan and propose to the Economic Development Corporation what they think is needed. I'm not going to go over this in detail, but 20% of the funds are going directly to housing. But they're going to other things too. It's one of the things I love about this is it's flexible, it can meet regional needs, and as you can see, they have regions all over Indiana participating in this because it's really worth it to them to do the planning, to prioritize their projects, and they have to come up with a match. If it's public dollars matching, it's 1-to-1. If the money's going to a private entity, it's a 3-to-1 match requirement. And the first $500 million was grants, but the second $500 million is grants and loans because they want it to revolve a lot more. They want it to be more ongoing. Okay, so I want to underline that this kind of led us to the sense that Kentucky might be a little bit behind in getting on top of accelerating its housing supply. So what would we recommend that you all focus on as you pursue your meetings this year and go into the next session? We do want to highlight two areas that our partners have long advocated for. One is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and then that state tax credit that I mentioned. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund gets $6 per recording fee. It's been the same since 1992. It's just a flat amount. It's not indexed. What that has meant is that, as you can see, this is quarter by quarter revenue, is that we are seeing lower and lower revenues because there's not a lot of real estate activity happening right now, right? And so, again, it's at less than $4 million per fiscal year at this point. This is just a chart to show you what other states charge as a recording fee. And many other states are far higher than Kentucky. Ohio is $17, West Virginia $20, and goes up from there, just to give you a sense of how we compare. You all might also consider the Rural Housing Trust Fund. Again, it only got one-time funding. It has no consistent source of funding, so that effectively goes dormant after we allocate the fiscal year $26. There's no more funding in that, and it won't be activated anymore. Excuse me. And then the Affordable Housing Tax Credit. I know that our developers have long advocated for that, and that's worth considering. But I'd like to get to what we think really is most important. And that is that you all set your sights on establishing flexible resources that really move the needle and accelerate housing production. Not small things at the edges, but something that really activates the larger marketplace. So I'm here not advocating for our nonprofits and our tax credit developers. I'm here advocating for the building industry and the building marketplace in Kentucky. Flexible resources can move the market by incentivizing public-private partnerships that accelerate housing production everywhere in the state. We really recommend looking at things like a revolving loan fund so that it doesn't have to constantly be replenished, but it can recycle. And it means whoever uses it has to have skin in the game. It has to be a financially sound project, but this flexible, low-cost financing could make all the difference in it being worth building moderate income homeownership options versus custom homes. Economic development tools tied to housing, that would be really meaningful. We hear from so many economic development agencies that they would like to be able to have a housing incentive along with their other economic development incentives. We even know, and we'll feature at our conference, some economic development agencies, ones in Henderson, where they built homes in order to get a major employer because they just felt like it was so important, and they could use tools to do that. And then lastly, things that focus on employer-assisted housing. So engaging, growing or new employers coming to the state in having some skin in that housing development. I really cannot overemphasize how important it is to have flexible state-level dollars. While we are happy to say grace over a lot of federal programs, I always say there's a 50-pound brick tied to every federal dollar, right? We have to do environmental reviews. We often have to do Davis-Bacon wage reporting. There are just so many cross-cutting federal regulations that add to the time and the cost, and honestly mean that your kind of mom and pop builder who, I live in Marion County, might build, let's say, 10 houses a year. They're not going to engage with our programs because they're too much of a pain in the rear, to be honest with you. We'll own that. We don't have the ability to change that at the federal level. And so I just really think it cannot be overemphasized, the value of having funds that you got to meet state code, you got to meet local code with whatever these folks build, but not erecting a whole lot more barriers to getting it done. It will lower costs, it'll make production faster, and it lessens the red tape. So in closing, if Kentucky had enough housing, we would have the reverse of those problems I listed a few slides ago. We would have lower average housing costs, higher home ownership, more workforce housing, increased household stability, lower eviction rates, and fewer homeless Kentuckians. There's so many positive upsides to us having enough housing. We do view this as the most urgent housing issue for Kentucky. All of our counties, rural and urban, need more for sale and rental units across the income bands. And housing is key to our economy. We didn't come up with this quote, but we say it all the time, which is that homes are where jobs go to sleep at night. If you want jobs, you got to have homes.
Thanks, Wendy. I want to sign off by just referring you again to the last slide here, which is the affordable housing conference that we're sponsoring in Covington this year on August the 20th and 21st. And I think our co-chairs have agreed to participate in the panel, and all of you should have received an email from Wendy setting forth the details of it and containing an invitation to you to attend. We're going to have a day-and-a-half conference. It's going to cover many aspects of the housing issues that we've covered here today. And in particular, this Ready and RIF program will be featured on Thursday, on the 21st morning, following the plenary session that some of you all will be participating in. So we hope you can come, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Well, very good. For those that are new on the Housing Task Force here, that was a lot of really good information. I mean, we spent all last year really, and that really kind of summarizes and gives us up-to-date information. I would encourage you to kind of pore over that information that she just gave you, because I think there's a lot of good nuggets of things that we can do in the state of Kentucky to advance housing. Now, we have a hard stop today, and I think what I'm going to do is, can y'all stay around just for, okay. I think we're going to go ahead. We have two Zoom presenters. They're probably going to be about 15 minutes apiece, and then we'll allow some time for members to ask questions. Probably most of them will be focused toward Wendy and Winston here, but let's do that. Let's hold our questions, and then we'll do our two Zoom presenters, and then come back for questions. So at this time, I think we have two presenters. One is Mr. Nolan Gray, who is a Bluegrass Institute scholar. Is Mr. Gray on the line?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Okay, hang on just a second. We can hear you. Do you have a presentation or not?
No, sir. Just
Okay.
remarks.
Very good. Okay, perfect. Well, we've got 10 or 15 minutes. If you can summarize in that much, try to watch your time. We've got some hard stops for meetings after this. But welcome, Mr. Gray. If you can just introduce yourselves, kind of give us your background, and the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the task force for the privilege to be able to speak this afternoon. Joining to you from out here in California. Why is a California housing policy wonk speaking to a Kentucky task force? Other than the fact that I was born and raised in Kentucky, 8th-generation Kentuckian, I love Kentucky and want to see it succeed. I'm coming to you from the future in California, of a state that has let housing affordability problems fester for decades, and I don't want that to happen to Kentucky. The unfortunate news is that if you want to turn into California, the solution is to do nothing. As your excellent staff reported in their presentation previously, Kentucky's on track to have a California-style housing crisis if we don't take action today. As in the rest of the country, home prices went up by something on the order of 50 to 60% over the past 5 or so years in Kentucky. And these prices are going to continue to go up given the state's economic competitiveness and increasing population. Median home prices as a multiple of median household incomes continue to rise in cities like Lexington, where I'm from, and Bowling Green. The median home price is now at or above 5 times the median household income, meaning that the typical family increasingly has no path to homeownership. Instead, they're stuck renting, and a large and growing share of Kentucky renters are spending a third or even in some cases half of their income on rent. And then in the most extreme cases, of course, when you've got renters who are spending such a huge share of their income on rent, any sort of economic instability, the loss of a job, unexpected medical payments can throw those households into homelessness. And again, we see the state continuing to set unfortunate records on homelessness. Again, what does this look like? We put the average Kentucky family increasingly in a situation where they have no path to homeownership. They're spending most of their income on rent, and anything going wrong can send them in a situation where they're living out of an extended stay hotel, living out of a car, or in the worst cases, living in a shelter on the street. This is all especially important given how economically competitive Kentucky is. Lots of jobs are moving to the state, and that's an exciting thing. But if we don't build the homes needed to accommodate that high and rising workforce, folks are going to feel the pain, and especially the folks who already live in Kentucky as higher income families move in and bid up the price of housing. From the outside looking in, Kentucky is on the California trajectory, and we want to avoid that. The good news is we have plenty of time to avoid California-style housing crisis. We know the root of the problem is a mismatch between supply and demand. When we survey the academic literature, when we do empirical analysis of this, we know that cities, counties, and states that are building a lot of housing relative to their peers are seeing housing prices relatively muted in their increases. And what that does is that allows the public dollars that are spent on deed-restricted affordable housing or special forms of housing for particularly vulnerable populations, those dollars go a lot further. But if we're in a situation where teachers and police officers and nurses and supermarket clerks can't remain stably housed without needing subsidy, we're never going to have enough dollars to solve the problem. Now, when we talk about housing affordability, I talk to a lot of folks and they say, well, the problem is high interest rates, the problem is federal budget changes, the problem is tariffs. Those things are all huge, huge problems. But of course, you all as state legislators have no control over what happens with those policies. But one of the things we can control is making sure that it's easy and relatively predictable to get a permit for the types of housing that states like Kentucky need to remain affordable. In Kentucky, as in so many other parts of the country, a thicket of restrictive rules, slow and unpredictable permitting, and high construction costs that are a function of state and local policies have put ourselves in a situation where even if some of those other federal and international issues get resolved, we're not going to be able to achieve housing affordability. I would flag some of the most impactful things that you can do don't necessarily involve spending a lot of taxpayer dollars. I know that's a sensitive issue, and they can often have bipartisan buy-in. Indeed, I think one of the most important things we can do to improve housing affordability is to restore property rights and allow folks to use the land that they own to add the housing that our state needs. Unfortunately, Kentucky has increasingly fallen behind on a lot of these regulatory reforms. I'm going to talk about three general buckets, and I think this complements what your staff iterated in their previous comments. The first is that in many cities and counties, local zoning often simply doesn't allow the types of housing that a state like Kentucky needs to get built. You know, when I say starter home, I think a lot of folks imagine single family home, 2-car garage on a 10,000 square foot, maybe even a half-acre lot. But for many households in 2025, a starter home might look like a townhouse. It might look like a condo in a small apartment building. It might look like a duplex where they can rent the other unit out and use that rent revenue to pay down their mortgage. Unfortunately, in many cases, the zoning rules simply don't allow that. But I'm going to be stressing solutions here. In recent years, the state of Florida has legalized housing in commercial zones. So in many parts of the country, housing cannot legally be built in any commercial zone. So you have a half-empty strip mall, or you have a half-empty office park, something that might realistically never be leased out in an age of remote work. What Florida said was, if an applicant can build workforce housing on that site, they should be allowed to do that, consistent with a reasonable density and height that reflects the local conditions. And if they can make that specifically workforce housing, they should be entitled to a property tax abatement to make sure that that pencils. We've not had a full report out on that yet because that's been in recent years, but it seems like the Live Local Act has helped to facilitate something on the order of 10 thousands of units in the pipeline at a period when construction is falling for a variety of reasons. There aren't a lot of happy stories here out of California, but one of the successful things that we've done has been legalizing accessory dwelling units. These are sometimes called mother-in-law units or granny flats. These are additional units that a homeowner can add to their property to, in many cases, called mother-in-law units for aging parents, or to keep young adult children close by while they save up for a down payment. That's partly why these ADUs have been so popular among groups like AARP, providing homeowners with options and flexibility to add additional units. Prior to 2017, ADUs were illegal to build almost everywhere in California, and we've passed legislation to empower homeowners and small property owners to add ADUs, and that's facilitated something on the order of 100,000 ADUs being built. That's 100,000 new homes that were built at no cost to the taxpayer that previously had been illegal. And in many cases, homeowners are adding these ADUs, getting an additional source of income, and they're achieving housing stability. In addition to zoning allowing for housing to be built, I would say it's all well and good if the zoning allows the housing to get built, but if it takes months or years to get a permit, if it's a long and unpredictable process, it might as well not be legal. Something that a few states have done in recent years, Tennessee, Florida, Texas, 3 states that I'll be highlighting pretty regularly here, have allowed for, in cases where the city or the county is delayed in issuing the permit or conducting the inspection, the applicant can hire a licensed third-party professional to do that work, to move the process along. That's absolutely key, especially for smaller projects. If there's a lot of unpredictability in permitting, if it could be 2 weeks or 2 months and you don't know, or 2 years to get all your entitlements and permits, that can really imperil projects, and especially smaller projects, and especially smaller projects built by small local developers who might not have an attorney or a planner full-time on staff. So making it really, really easy to get through the process is absolutely key. And then the third bucket I think that's really, really important is cost containment. Ensuring that the government isn't needlessly imposing a bunch of rules and regulations that force housing prices to be higher than they need to be. You know, there are rules related to health and safety that might increase costs, but that's just necessary. But to the extent that we're increasing housing costs without any basis in health and safety, those are areas where we can improve. Returning to Texas, just earlier this year, they passed SB 15, which was a priority of their lieutenant governor, to allow for smaller lot single-family homes, allow homeowners to get in on the ladder of homeownership by purchasing a home on a slightly smaller lot. That's absolutely key, given how land prices continue to rise in high demand contexts. Alternatively, in Arkansas, they passed legislation preempting high local building material mandates that forced developers to use building materials that were much more expensive than what would have potentially been allowed under the state building code. That was Act 446. Or North Carolina eliminating parking mandates that forced, in many cases, projects to come with huge parking lots that were virtually never full, or large parking garages that could increase the cost of a new unit by $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 per unit, providing consumers with the flexibility to purchase exactly the type of housing that meets their needs, and providing developers the flexibility to provide it. I'd stress this. A lot of these reforms are necessary but not sufficient. Of course, we have to be planning for growth. We have to be lining up the public support for the infrastructure needed for additional housing, exploring the building code and other aspects of land use regulation and housing regulation to make sure that we're allowing for the most affordable and safe forms of housing to be built. And Kentucky could easily be a leader on this issue without necessarily huge increases in public outlays, or without necessarily big, complicated programs. You know, a lot of these reforms that I've highlighted and that we'll provide materials on and follow-up correspondence are letting the market provide the housing that our communities need. Again, I'm coming to you from the future. Decades of strict rules and costly mandates gets you to a place like where California is today, where hundreds of thousands of people are leaving the state, where folks who have remained have no path to homeownership. They're doubling or tripling up in apartments. Folks are living in tents and cars. I desperately don't want that for my home state. And I would urge you to continue working on this issue, and I appreciate the leadership of the task force on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gray. Those are insightful words. Are you gonna submit those your statement to us so we can have that for the record, or is that
Yes, sir. I can do that.
your notes? Okay. Well, and I appreciate Mr. Waters putting this together. Jim Waters is here in the audience as well from the Bluegrass Institute. So our final guest is Alex Horowitz. Alex, are you on the line? Very good. Alex is the project director for housing policy for the Pew Charitable Trust. And Alex, if you can introduce yourself, kind of give us a little background, and you have maybe 15, 16 minutes or so, and then we may have some questions for you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And thanks to the chairs and the committee for having me here. Glad to be with you. I'm at the Pew Charitable Trust. Pew is a nonprofit organization that does research and policy work in the public interest. And the area that I focus on is housing, and that includes housing affordability.
Alex, you may have to share your screen for your presentation to show up on our end. There you go.
Okay. Is it coming through?
Yep. That made me look good, like I knew what was going on.
All right. Excellent. Thanks so much. Great. So big picture, I want to associate myself with all of the remarks that you heard from Wendy and Nolan. I thought they were both terrific. Really enjoyed their testimony, appreciate the information they shared, and I agree with them across the board. Wanted to flag that the housing shortage is indeed national, and it's severe, and we see it's reached into Kentucky. But nationally, about 30%, half of renters are spending more than 30% of income on rent. In Kentucky, that's 42%. A quarter of renters nationally spending more than 50% of income on rent. In Kentucky, 21% of renters are spending more than half of income on rent. And the reason is inventory is just low. We've been in a seller's market for 5 years now. Anybody who's bought or sold a home knows when there aren't a lot of homes out there, prices are high and homes go for more than asking. Some of what's going on is that household size keeps declining. And household size in the US has reached an all-time low of 2.49 Americans per home, when a lot of our current zoning was adopted in the last century, 1920s, 1930s, average household size was up around 4. And now it's at 2.5. Kentucky actually has a lower average household size than the country overall at 2.38, and 65% of Kentucky households have 1 or 2 people in them. That's not a great match for our housing stock, which is overwhelmingly single family detached. And we see that housing production is down in Kentucky as well. So this is a 26% decline in construction in Kentucky going back to the start of this century. And over the past 6 years, Kentucky ranks 37th in the US in housing permits issued. So this shortfall explains most of the affordability problems. And it's resulted in a decline in inventory of 21% going back to 2018 in Kentucky. That creates this ongoing seller's market where prices get high and they price out first-time homebuyers, with the average age of a first-time homebuyer in the US jumping from 29 in the 1980s to 38 last year. So the median cost of a home in Kentucky is up 49% in the last 5 years. That's a steep increase, and that puts homeownership out of reach for a lot of households, even when interest rates are lower than they are today. But it's not just home prices. Rents have gone up too, because we're in a long-term landlord's market since there aren't enough units out there. When there are lots of units, that's a tenant's market. When there's not much available, that's a landlord's market. Well, Kentucky's rental availability rate was 8% 5 years ago. Now it's 6%. That creates an ongoing landlord's market where tenants have to compete too hard for too few homes. As a result, the median monthly rent in Kentucky has jumped 42%, going back to 2017. And this is the pattern we're seeing throughout the US. Availability goes down, rents go up. Inventory goes down to buy, prices go up. So there are places that have done it differently. These are 4 cities from around the US, Minneapolis, New Rochelle, Portland, Tysons, that all of them tried something different. All of them said, let's make it really easy to build, especially apartments near jobs, near commerce. And once they did, all of them started producing housing at more than double the rate of the US average. As a result, while rents were going up 30% in the US, rents barely rose in these jurisdictions. Minneapolis right now is in its 9th year without rent increases because they've made it so easy to build. So look, that's good news for everybody when rental growth slows down. But we see that right now, the shortage is actually hurting low-income residents the most. We segmented all the zip codes in Zillow in the US and looked at their rent growth by income. Well, the highest income zip codes have seen rents go up 44% in the last 7 years. Look, that's a steep rent increase, no 2 ways about it. But for the lowest income quarter of zip codes, rents went up 62% over the past 7 years. Because when high-income households can't find a place to live, they tend to move into middle-income neighborhoods. When middle-income households can't find a place to live, then they tend to move into low-income neighborhoods. Low-income households, nowhere to go. They end up tolerating the steepest rent increases because this scarcity means that there's cutthroat competition for each home, and landlords don't have to compete for tenants. They can raise rents because they've got this commodity that is scarce, that's created by regulatory barriers driving this artificial shortage. Now, there are some cities that saw a lot of apartments come online in 2023. These are projects that mostly got started when interest rates were really low. Well, so many apartments came online in these cities that rents went down year over year. That's good. That's the market responding to incentives, to the supply and demand imbalance. But what was most striking to me here is Class C rents, older, naturally affordable apartments, actually had a steeper decline in rents than the new fancy buildings, the Class A, because this enabled that process we just discussed to happen in reverse. Now, high-income households have somewhere to go. They move into fancy buildings. They move into single-family homes that are coming online. Middle-income households now can move out of low-income neighborhoods into middle-income neighborhoods if they wish. This takes the pressure off the housing stock. So suddenly, low-income households don't have to compete for their own homes anymore because there are enough for everybody. You heard about homelessness from Wendy and from Nolan so far. Overall, most people going through homelessness, it's short term. It's less than a year. That's about 78% of people going through homelessness. It's been less than a year. Well, Kentucky has seen a 28% increase in homelessness since 2019. This is exactly what we would expect from Kentucky issuing a below average rate of permits and having this inventory decline and this shortage of rentals, with the rental availability rate falling from 8% to 6%, because housing costs are the main driver of homelessness. We look at cities like Houston and Minneapolis that made it easy to build. They saw a lot of housing come online. Phoenix and Tucson, they still have restrictive zoning. Didn't see as much housing get built. Well, rents soared in Phoenix and Tucson, and homelessness did as well. In Houston and Minneapolis, where they removed regulatory barriers, made it easier to build, rent growth slowed down sharply, and homelessness dropped because incomes had some time to catch up. We look at Raleigh. Raleigh's a nice example of this also. They made it easier to build with zoning reforms in 2021 and 2022, made it much easier to build apartments, townhouses, duplexes. Well, housing production shot up 60% a year, even though interest rates were high. Well, once they did that, rents, which had been rising at 7% a year, rent growth slowed down to 3% a year. Homelessness had been going up. Once they made these changes and rents came under control, homelessness started dropping in Raleigh. We're seeing this conversation, though, move from the local level to the state level. From 2012 to 2016, all states combined in the US only passed an average of one law a year to allow more homes. 2017 to 2022, 18 laws a year. Okay, that's a big change. The last 2 years, 48 laws a year to make it easier to build homes. This year, we've already seen more than 75 laws passed in states. The conversation, which used to be local, has moved to the state level because this is a matter of statewide importance, and no jurisdiction can solve this problem on their own. It can only be thoroughly solved at the state level. So the types of changes we're seeing are laid out here on this slide, but you'll see the accessory dwelling unit law, 17 states have passed those now. Arkansas did so this session. Legalizing multifamily and commercial. You heard Nolan talk about that in Florida. Texas passed a great version of that this year. Georgia was the first state to allow third parties to review permits, the step you heard Nolan talk about, so that third parties who are accredited can do inspections as well. We saw Tennessee pass several building code reforms to lower the cost of construction in 2024. Montana sharply limiting parking mandates this year. Iowa, the first state that allowed people to live together regardless of whether they're in the same family or not. So essentially, kind of passing a Golden Girl style law to allow roommates to share homes, because that's often the least expensive form of housing, and it uses your existing housing stock. And Texas this year passed the strongest law in the country to simplify office to residential conversions. Look at a city like Louisville, which has an above average office vacancy rate, but it can be challenging to convert offices into apartments. Laws like this make it easier, so rezoning isn't needed. I do want to single out Texas as the state that, in my opinion, had the single best session in the country this year to allow more homes. They passed 7 bipartisan bills, legalizing multifamily housing on all commercial areas, legalizing starter homes that you heard Nolan mention, simplifying office to residential conversions so no rezoning is necessary and no parking mandates can be added beyond what's already there, limiting protest petitions against rezoning, allowing a single stair, so allowing one staircase for small apartment buildings, which is just as safe as 2, allowing the expanded use of manufactured housing, just as Kentucky did this session as well, curbing roommate occupancy limits. And I wanted to flag on office to residential that office to dorm style housing is much less costly than office to regular apartments. whether these are actual dorms for college students or they're just for people who are happy to have a room and then have a shared kitchen, living room, shared bathrooms, and have a lower cost of living to be downtown, or have housing that otherwise would be out of reach for them, because this kind of housing is less expensive. But we see that offices tend to convert much better to dorms than to regular apartments. But building code reforms are a big piece of the puzzle. And so we're increasingly seeing states, with Tennessee leading the way and North Carolina taking some steps as well, to make it easier to build. And this lowers hard costs. It lowers construction costs without jeopardizing safety. But we're seeing these changes take root throughout the country, including this session with strong laws in Texas, in Montana, and states allowing dorm-style housing or shared units, such as in Oregon and Washington. Fire safety concerns are part of the reason why construction has gotten quite so expensive and why sometimes new housing, especially apartments, get blocked. We hand-coded all of the fire deaths in Kentucky and for 2023, the most recent year with full data available. The fire death rate in Kentucky in single-family homes was 12 per million. In apartments built before 2000, it was 12 per million, and there were no fire deaths in the whole state in modern apartments built since 2000. Modern apartments are the only kind that tends to be blocked by fire safety concerns, but that ends up costing lives because modern multifamily housing is by far the safest type of housing. Lastly, these reforms tend to be popular and popular along party lines. That doesn't mean that everybody who speaks at a community meeting is enthusiastic about more housing, but we see that whether it's Democrats, Independents, or Republicans, the public is supportive of making it easier to build because they recognize there's a housing shortage and they care about affordability. Here's my information there, and the QR code has some of Pew's research.
Well, very, very good, Alex. All three of our presentations are really good today. I mean, succinct, some good information. I know that, like I said, I've said this multiple times, we have a lot of new people on our task force, but if there are any burning questions or that you'd like, that any of the members would like to ask the folks from Kentucky Housing Corporation, and we have our other presenters on the line as well. We've got 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe we have a hard stop at 2:30. At 2:30, we have a hard stop. So are there any members that have specific questions right now? It's a lot of information. Who was it? Representative Watkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question, if I could have two really quick, direct questions for KHC.
Sure, that'd be fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let Ms. Smith get up to the microphone. Mr.
Certainly.
Miller.
I am very excited about this presentation, of course. I have a local government housing background, and I'm also a realtor, so this was nerd heaven for me. Really quickly, you talked about the projection gap between 2024 and 2029 if housing construction levels stay flat. Can you talk about any sort of projected annual rate of creation or unit creation that would need to be to close that gap?
I'll be honest, we would love to get that to you. We did not put that in the scope of our market analysts. We really just wanted them. They did, I will share that they factored in existing construction patterns as well as economic development that was coming and the pipeline of housing development that was known across the state. So it is a complex way that they looked at it, but I cannot tell you this is what we've got to build, to get there. Part of what is so hard to predict is if we can get more middle and even upper middle, it could have that trickle down effect of freeing up the lower priced options. So while I don't know the exact number, I know that adding to supply, as our two other speakers talked about, will help people up and down the income range. But we'd love to work on that if that's something you want to charge us with.
I would love to see that, of course. Speaking from a data guy, really quick follow-up. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm interested in that supply gap by region of the state, even down to county levels, of course. I live in Louisville, so I know our problem very well. But I think disaggregated in that manner would really make sure that people understand that this isn't an urban problem, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's a 120 county-wide problem. I think it's the biggest existential threat that the state is facing. So.
Well, and you called yourself a nerd, so I will share with you that in our housing supply gap analysis, the full report, which we can get you a link or we can get you the printed report, and we presented it in more depth. Last time we have the county by county maps and all of the gaps as a share of the county housing units, the county households, so that you see the relative gap county to county. Because when you talk about sheer numbers, it looks like Louisville is where all the gap is, and it is big. But when you look at it as a share of the housing in each county, it's really big in a bunch of small rural communities too. It's a very severe issue in some of our rural counties.
Even down to the housing types?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Carpenter and then Representative Holloway.
Well, I'm kind of like the representative there. It's kind of my background, so it's an important topic. But I guess it's for everybody. But talking about, there's so much information, and everybody talks about affordable housing, and I tell everybody, affordable housing is different for every person that walks up and down the street. Is it affordable for the person that's making $6? Well, there's nobody probably making that now, but $10 an hour or $15 an hour? Or are you talking about people that are making $150,000? Because lots of people come to me and say, we're looking for affordable housing. And I say, well, what price range are you looking for? And so if you're really looking for, something, somebody told me the other day, they called me a realtor and said, Jared, have you got anything for $150,000? I was like, I've got a frame built house that doesn't have a roof on it yet for $150,000. And that's not a big house. I'm doing a lot right now that are what we call affordable housings. I live in Berea, Kentucky, Madison County, a really fast-growing community. But these houses are about 1,450 square feet, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, brick skirts, vinyl siding. Nothing, no Taj Mahals, but nice single-family homes. When I started building these in 2019 in this one development we have, there was 189,000. To yesterday, I closed, or Friday, I closed 289. And you're saying, man, you're making a lot of extra money. The sad part is, on my spreadsheets I keep, I made the same profit on the 189 house as I make on the 289 house. And the reason that is because every material down the list, from the foundation to the roof, to the drywall, to the paint, to everything we do, the increase of cost is substantial. And my lot price, I went from paying $25,000 for a lot in 2019. These are less than quarter-acre lots, till my lots are now, and I buy 10 to 15 at a time. That's how many I try to build 10 or 15 houses at a time, track houses. That makes it more affordable for me. In 2025 now, I'm paying for the same exact lot in the same subdivision size, $46,000. So you can see, and now you'll say, well, gosh, the guy's making a lot more money on those lot prices. Well, I rode in here with this nice outfit I had on because I was on a bulldozer before I come here, and I'm doing a development right now and we're putting in the sanitary sewer, all the storm sewer, all the mandates that the gentlemen on the screen that are shaking their heads are talking about, and my infrastructure cost has went up exponentially. You can't even imagine what it cost me 3 years ago or 4 years ago. The last development I did is like $300 a running foot for my roads. Is kind of how we figure it. It's going to cost over $600 a road. So just do this math real quick. 2,000 feet of road is going to cost $1.2 million now to put all the improvements into it. Not long ago, like 5-6 years ago, it would have cost $600,000. And so the difference in this cost is just really hard to figure out of what you're going to do. And so I don't have the answer to it because I'm always trying to find cheaper stuff. Lot size is one thing that you guys talked about a lot that makes a huge difference. And on this development I'm doing right now, I'm doing what we call affordable housing. And I was able to get a smaller lot size because we were able to do a residential 1A program to try to help a more high density. So we're getting, the lot sizes are much smaller. They're like 50 feet in the front versus 100 feet normally that our community calls for. And that makes you be able to get a lot more lots on the same road frontage that you have to be able to make the cost of the houses more affordable. And I'm glad you said one statement. I don't mean to run on here, but it's kind of in my mind. I've started doing, and I've got a bunch of rental too, but I've started doing some things on this new development I'm doing. I'm going to do smaller houses. I'm going to do 1,100 square foot minimum with a 1-car garage. And and I've built some in some old places. I tore some of my rental houses down. I did a 2-bedroom house, and my realtor friends and all the people were like, "Man, what are you doing? We don't do 2-bedroom houses around here." And I was like, "Well, one of my most popular rentals is a 1-bedroom apartment." And what you said was exactly right. There's less and less demand for people that are looking for something with a 3 or 4 bedroom. We still have a lot of those, but there's just not much on the market to where you can do something, make it more affordable and have less square footage, but still have a kitchen, a nice living room, or 1 or 2 bedrooms, or some people want a nice bedroom with an office at home if it's just a single person or if they're a married couple. And so that house sold before I got the roof on it. And so I'm really thinking that's what really got me motivated on this new place I'm doing is I'm going to try to downsize it, but make the houses just as nice, but not have near the square footage, because square footage is what costs money. You build 1,100 square foot, it still costs me $190 a foot to do that. Or if I build a 4,000 square foot house, it's still $190 a foot. The material, they don't sell me the material for a bigger house at a more expensive price than a smaller house, unless I'm doing a lot nicer amenities on the inside. If you put marble versus tile or LVT or, all those things. And so we're trying to do some things to make it more affordable. So I think I'm going to be able to do these houses, which sounds crazy to me. I've been doing this 20 years. 1,100 square foot house, I'm going to say that's going to be affordable for like $225. And I'm like, goodness gracious, that should be like $125. And I'm hoping to make money on it. I'm not going to price any until I get a little farther on them. But, in our community, there's just not anything like that. I closed 4 houses last week, and the reason I did it, for $289, there's not another house in our community on sale that's a brand new house in a nice area that has the amenities that we have for $289. Most of them are $319 and up. So that makes you think how stupid I am that I'm willing to lose profit by selling it too cheap. So, but I think those are the reason I like this task force and the demand is because that cost barrier and our community is allowing us to do some things to make it more affordable, because everybody can't afford to do these things out of their own pocket if it still doesn't try to make some money. And it's not that you're trying to get rich or make a huge amount of money. There's just so many unforeseen costs. And that's why my apartment rents have went up, because I built an apartment building last year, and it cost me about $100,000 more to build a 4-plex than it did 5 years ago to build the same 4-plex. So I can't afford to rent it for my same $800 a month that I was charging, because it won't cash flow. And so we can go on and on and on, but I'll hush after that. But thank you all very much. You're right on point, but you're like me. I'm not sure if any of us have the answer, but we're still looking for those.
Yep. So now you can see why Senator Carpenter's on this committee. He's got a lot of information. Representative Holloway.
I had a couple of comments as well, but I'll just stick to my question. This is for Mr. Gray. You had mentioned that Kentucky was lagging behind in its issuance of building permits. Can you explain more about what might be causing that?
Well, I don't know that I could speak specifically to building permits. I'm lagging behind specifically some of these reforms. As much as it pains me to say, states like Tennessee have made a lot of progress on regulatory reforms in recent years and speeding up and making permit issuance more predictable. And so, I can't speak to whether or not that's reflected in permitting rates right now, but it certainly will be on a long enough time scale.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Representative McPherson.
Yes, well, thank you. I'm a real estate appraiser by trade, been doing it about 30 plus years. I'm in the Bowling Green, Allen County, Simpson County area, real fast growing area. So what we saw about a year or 2, 3 years ago was what Senator Carpenter said was the size of houses going down and the price staying relatively the same. That's what we've had to do. That's where we're going with it. That's the data showing that. One other thing that I am seeing and I think is really good is repurposing properties, repurposing houses. A lot of these older houses, even in the Warren County area and around, I've seen them purchase those houses they have good bones, but everything else is kind of gone. But they have the water meter, they have the septic system, they have a sewer hookup, whatever it might be. All those infrastructure items are already there, and you can count on them and go forward. And they're blowing out the kitchens and the bathrooms, and everything else is pretty common. And those houses, if they can keep them in the $200,000 to $250,000 range, they're selling. It's quick as you can go. When we get into the rural areas, our biggest problem is infrastructure. Infrastructure, and it's about those 3 and 4 inch water lines that were put in 30 and 40 and 50 years ago. They can't handle, they just can't handle the water and the amount of water that they're putting through them. And we're going to have to go back and do a better job of rebuilding either water towers, either oversized lines, whatever it might be. But in our area, the weakest link is our infrastructure. So that's something I think we should look at pretty strongly. And if we can do some tax credits, some taxing incentives to build infrastructure. Again, when you put the more dense houses, the smaller houses in these areas, you've got more cars trying to get out to go to work at the same time. So you've got to watch when you, and I'm for smaller lots if it'll work, but then you've got double the traffic. So you've got to think of all the infrastructure that goes on with that. So I think that's just something we have to look at on a daily basis. I too was at a house this morning that I'm starting before I drove up here this morning. So I appreciate your time.
Very good. Yep. I feel like I ought to advertise my Senate Bill 50 from last year. It had infrastructure development district that put monies into a pot and for developers on infrastructure. So you'll probably see that coming back around. So anybody else? Our co-chair has a closing comment. Representative Whitten.
Thank you all, and thanks for all of our presenters. This has been a great start. I really appreciate the chance to have this in our second year, and I'm thrilled to be the co-chair again. I think that we've moved the ball a lot, maybe just in our collective acceptance of the problem. I think that now, where last year we were just trying to kind of set the ideas of really what the problem was, now we understand it. The bad news is that the problem has not gone away in a year. The good news is that so many of the potential solutions that you all talked about, we've already talked about. These are in motion. We've been looking at other states. We've really, I think we're gonna, and our goal for this task force is to really tee up some of these pieces of legislation, vet them so that when session starts, they can just go right to committee and we can really get a lot done. So I appreciate you all for kind of resetting the table, making sure that everyone understands that this problem is not close to going away. But I am encouraged by the fact that we already have a lot of these solutions identified.
Very good. So with that said, I would encourage the members, if you have a specific area that you want to focus on or that you think is interesting, to get with one of the co-chairs, and if we can start the bill process so we can actually vet something here in the fall and be ready to go. But we are going to be cognizant of everybody's time during this task force. Everybody's busy, and we'll try to limit these to an hour and a half. So once again, I want to say thank you to the presenters. A lot of work was put into summarizing this data and this information to help us kind of round out the issue and help us get a good start on this year's task force. So with that, we stand adjourned. Our next meeting will be July the 28th.